Every coffee drinker is a drug addict? That's a bold and heavy claim to just be throwing around. But my expert today assures us that it is the truth and backs that up with enormous studies all compiled in one book. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petry. And I'm back from my first vacation from the show in almost 4 years. My guest today is Norbert Heuser, and unfortunately for everyone who experienced a brief superiority to coffee drinkers, you too are probably a drug addict in the same way. Shockingly, 80% of the global population uses a psychoactive substance regularly. It's known as caffeine. Feel free to scoff now, but Norbert does indeed show how bad caffeine can truly be for the human body and how long the hidden effects can last if they don't become permanent. Sadly, we got disconnected towards the end of this interview due to a total outage in our guest's area, but I still think it is a provocative listen with lots of information. Let's stop bragging about our caffeine addictions. Welcome to the show, Norbert Heuser.
Well, Colton, thanks for having me. I'm very pleased, very honored to be on your show today.
Thank you. I am so excited to have you on today. Why don't you explain who you are a bit for the audience?
Okay, well, the shortest version is I'm a German entrepreneur, a German inventor, public speaker, life and health coach, author, and consultant for management. I have visited so far 39 countries. I've given more than 200 interviews, podcasts, webinars, and seminars. Seminars was my main thing up to the moment of the COVID lockdown. I love live audiences. I love to work with live audience and Q&A. I love Q&A so that I'm not talking out there. That's pretty much me.
Nice. Well, like I said, I love to have you on the show. I have your book sitting behind me, and it is probably one of the catchiest titles that I've seen in a while because it just it grabs your attention the moment you see it. You're like, wait, what?
Well, there are different opinions about this. Yes, the book title is very originally Every Coffee Drinker is a Drug Addict. And what happens is here, it's the title, some people like yourself are attracted to it. This is why I chose it. But then again, some people are on the defensive side because they don't want to confront that they may be an addict.
Well, and I could see that should be the reason they pick up the book, right? Is to say well, I'm not a drug addict. Let me see what this book says so that I can refute that information.
And that book not only talks about coffee as an addiction, okay, but an addiction in general. And it's a part of my life. And you see, when we talk about addiction, what does addiction mean to me? Addiction and coffee is not the main thing. It's about caffeine. And the book titled Coffee Addiction and Caffeineism says it all. It's caffeine. And caffeine we have not only in coffee, but we have it in black tea, green tea, white teas. We have it in many soda pops and in most, if not all, energy drinks. And caffeine is the problem, and I will explain later on why it is a problem and what does it do to your health. But it's a caffeine. And nowadays, more and more, and I'll give you an example later, caffeine is hidden in snacks, in food, believe it or not. And it's very tempting. And the problem is, I say in the book title, Caffeine and Sugar, the most widespread consumed drugs in the world. For me, sugar is the most spread drug in the world. And caffeine is second, okay? But they're legal. So there's nothing legally wrong with them. So there are not outlaws, and this makes it so dangerous. But I got to start perhaps with a definition about addiction. Addiction is a dependency on what I called the 3 Ps for the letter P. 3 Ps. When we think about addiction, we typically think about, well, drugs and alcohol and cigarettes, right? Okay, so you can be addicted to a product, the first P. Everybody understands that. you can be addicted to a person, the second P. And the third P, you can be addicted to a procedure or process. This is where most people kind of shake their hand and what the hell is that procedure? Or addicted to a person? Yeah. And it's usually when relationships are very destructive, where outside person says, what the hell are you guys doing? You are killing each other, right? It's an addiction, and a person can't get away from it. And I explained this in the book deeper, of course. Everything we discussed today in the book is much more explained. Now, procedure or process, this became much more prominent. Think about nowadays about the addiction to cell phones, to social media. It's an addiction. It became an addiction. Take away a cell phone from a 12, 14-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever it is, but especially the younger generation. If you take it away from them, they go crazy because they got nothing to do with themselves. And the point is, like, I'm at an age group where 2/3 of my life I spent without a cell phone and without the internet. So I do know what to do with myself if I don't have these gadgets. Okay. So these are the three P's. And the compulsion to follow the addiction is stronger than your own free will to say no. And if it's stronger, then it is an addiction. And I did an intensive study in my life when I was, 45 years ago. I was very, very sick. And I had never a doctor because I was never in hospital. So I went on the yellow pages, found me a doctor. Little did I know that this doctor was the best choice of my life. And this doctor is the reason I'm here today and we're talking what we're talking. I was very, very sick and close to pass it on. And within a few weeks, a few months, he saved me. And I was an adult management consultant at this time, so I had jobs to do, right? But I made a decision. I was so intrigued by what he did. It made so much sense that I started an internship with this doctor. And for 1 year, I went every day except except Sunday and Christmas. Every day except Sunday and Christmas, I worked with this doctor as his assistant, as his intern, as his right hand, and as his guinea pig. We did enormous tests, which normal doctors would refuse to do, as they would consider too dangerous. So what I learned in that year made me change my job, modify my job. So as a management consultant, I added the addiction to food and beverages. And I found that most people have an addiction to food, certain foods and beverages. So I added it to my work as a management consultant because I found that most people I consulted were addicted, some heavy on drugs, which I stayed away from. That's not my thing to handle. But a lot of them addicted to alcohol, and a lot of them to food addictions, which they were not aware of. Like I had a food addiction, a food allergy, a food intolerance. And once I understood it and I moved away from it, I was saved. So that was a big turn in my life and made me then, at the end of the day, the final day to write this book.
Well, it was one of those, when I was preparing for the interview, I think Google was mind reading me a bit because I put in caffeine addiction and it directed me to substance use disorder. And I was like, okay, interesting direction. I read it and it says it's defined by a craving, a tolerance, a withdrawal, and an inability to stop. And I was like, that pretty much describes coffee and sugar to a T, right? Like most people, they crave coffee. We've all seen the shirts that say, like, don't talk to me until I've had my morning coffee.
Exactly.
And those are typically the people who build a tolerance to it, right? They go from maybe a cup a day to 3 cups a day to 5 cups a day. And then if they stop using it, there is a physical withdrawal from caffeine. And so there is an inability to stop using it. So it is a substance use disorder qualified material.
Of course. But as it is legal, people jump on fentanyl, of course, quite rightly, and other substances, quite rightly. But nobody gives a care about the addiction of caffeine. And you will learn today, if you haven't read my book yet, a lot of medical consequences, okay, health consequences. So I gave over 15, 20 years seminars. And in these seminars, I always warned about coffee. Now, the interesting part is, in my life, I never drank coffee. Never, ever. I love the smell of coffee, fresh grounded coffee. I love the smell of it, but I never drank coffee. And I hardly ever drink soda pops and never energy drinks. Not that I'm a saint, I have my other areas. So when I was on stage the last 15 years with webinars, seminars, I said, guys, stay away from caffeine, stay away from coffee, right? But I never had a practical experience, while most everything else I taught and I spoke about, like electromagnetic radiation, the danger of cell phones, the 19 possible causes for bad sleep, and blah, 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 and tattoos harm your body. Nobody talks about it, but I dig into it. So I said, okay, when the lockdown was, and I couldn't travel and do my seminars, and I started slowly with webinars instead, I said, well, it's time for me to find out. Here is the kicker, how it works when I worked with clients who had alcohol problems. A client who has an alcohol problem, if it's today a beautiful sunshine day, he says, that's such a beautiful day, we got to celebrate and we got to drink a bit of a nice champagne, a nice whatever, right? Next day, it's raining cats and dogs. The same person says, this is such a dreary weather. I got to make some enjoyment here, right? So he has always a justification. But I can tell you as a side note, with every alcoholic I worked, the very next day, he sworn to God he will never, ever drink again. And he meant it. The person really meant it. And there's lots behind this. And I just give you this example because in a minute you understand why I gave you this example about the alcoholic. So in this lockdown, and I turned myself into a coffee addict. Every day on my way to work, I drove by the drive-in and I picked up a coffee. I drank every day a coffee, and I decided for 30 days to drink every day a coffee. The first days, it was very painful physically in the stomach, the acidity of coffee and so on and so forth, right? And of course, I became jittery with the caffeine. And I did it for 30 days. I sacrificed my health for science, right? I wanted to know, not talking ivory tower. All right. So after 30 days, I said, okay, today's the last day, last coffee. That's it. The 31st day, on my way to work, I said, what the heck? One day really doesn't matter, does it? So 31st day, I drank a coffee. The second day, same story again. And I looked in the mirror and said, come on, you are like all your clients with alcohol problems. Now you're looking for a justification. And it went that far that I said, why the hell did I say 30 days? Why didn't I say 60 days, right? And I knew I was in the trap. And then it took me 2 months to get out of it. 2 months to get out of it. And I experienced firsthand what it means to be addicted and what it means to be addicted to a drug. I had the addiction before to certain foods, but not to what I call drugs or soft drugs. Caffeine is for me a soft drug. So I made the self-test, and then I decided to write the book. Then I did a research for 2 years. And what you find in my books is the research for 2 years, everything people have to know about coffee and caffeine.
Well, and this really is one that you see people, becoming more and more addicted to because it exists in so many forms now, right? Like back in the day, it was all tea and coffee, right? And it was kind of a replacement because people were drinking alcohol since there was no clean water. And you're like, oh, well, if you brew it, you don't get as poisoned. So people started drinking coffee and it focused them. But now we're like, we have it in pill form, we have it in candy form, there's a gum form, you've got energy drinks, the whole spectrum of caffeine products.
Plus hidden caffeine. I will give you later an example of hidden caffeine, where you don't even know there's caffeine in it. Okay, you're not aware of it unless you read perhaps the fine print. And lately, I've realized that there's a lot of advertising for mushroom coffee. You come across these advertisements?
I have seen a lot of that, like Rise and some of those companies.
Okay, so I dove into 2-3 of these products to find out, as an after research of my book or for the next edition, to add it on, right? And basically, they have all caffeine. They're lying to you, okay? They give you the upfront impression that it's caffeine free. Somehow they make that impression, right? That when you look in the details and the fine print, they have all caffeine. So we talk about the hidden caffeine. The biggest problem, which I found then, was the health consequences. Okay. I found, I don't know whether you are aware that every person who's seriously ill, let's take the extreme example, cancer, right? Cancer is typically extremely acidic. They live too acidic. And cancer feeds on sugar and acidity. The more you basically you grow your own cancer, you feed your cancer by eating sugar and by drinking caffeine. This is a fact. This is a simple medical fact, right? So caffeine is highly acidic, and it destroys, according to a study which I found in Switzerland, that when you drink caffeine, it destroys your gray brain matter, which is, of course, widely not known, that it destroys gray brain matter. And a second study in Australia, and this is very remarkable, the second study had 17,000 participants. 17,000, which is enormous, right? And they proved that caffeine intake increases your chance of Parkinson, dementia, and especially, again, reduces your gray brain matter. And here I have a bit of a statistic to share, which shows you how acidic coffee can be. Our normal level, healthy level, when we drink beverages, should be, pH level should be 7.5. Let's say 7 to 8, 7.5. Now, if you drink a drink which has 7.5, and I drink a drink which has 6.5, you would say, well, that's just one number difference. So what the heck? Yes, it's one number difference, but it's what they call a logarithmic scale, which means it's 10 times too acidic. From 7.5 to 6.5. To 5.5 is 100 times too acidic. To 4.5 is 1,000 times too acidic. And so on and so on. And now you see here examples of caffeine, different coffees in caffeine, and you see they're typically between 100 and 1,000 times too acidic compared to the acidity of your blood level, which is 7.34.
And not necessarily in the way I'd have thought. Like, I'd have thought a dark roast would be more acidic, and yet a dark roast is less acidic than a cold brew is.
Yes, yes. So there are wrong information, and there's no information, and there's something as well. We just make up in our mind what we think it could be, right? So here's a scale. 7.5 is neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So the coffees are all in red there, the typical bandwidth of coffees. Now, if you go further down, 3.5 is 10,000 times too acidic. Now, 2.5 pH is 100,000 times too acidic, which the body just cannot carry. It's impossible. It cannot compensate. So now you say, who's so stupid to drink something which is 100,000 times too acidic? You got to be an idiot. Well, basically, the idiot is every Coca-Cola drinker and similar drinks. They have an acidity of 2.5 to my own research, which means they're 100,000 times too acidic. And the body cannot compensate for that. The body has to compensate for that under stress. Because if your acidity in your blood, instead of 7.34, would go down to 6 or 5, you would be sick or die. So the fact remains that acidity is a big problem in our daily life. And basically, everybody who is very sick is always too acidic. So as a management life consultant, people ask me, I have cancer, what should I do? I said, I cannot give you advice. I'm not a medical doctor. However, what I would do if I would be you, if it would be me or my wife, I would stop immediately any forms of sugar, including fruits. I would stop immediately any acidic drink. And on my website, there's a chart. When you go to my website, improveyourlife.us, under health, there's a chart of some drinks which show you how acidic they are, that you understand they're all acidic. And the answer is, bottom line, everything except good, healthy water, every drink is too acidic. Wine, beer, juice, whatever it is. The caffeine we have in the coffee or in a drink is, of course, another issue. And the NASA made an interesting test. The NASA took spiders and analyzed the spiders and their spider web, right? The spider web for me is a piece of art, is a piece of architecture. It's a miracle, one of these many miracles in nature. You see on top the spider web before caffeine, and then they gave caffeine, and the spiders were not able to construct a regular spider web anymore. Isn't that surprising?
I mean, it's erratic. Like anybody who's seen these tests, and there's some they used, other drugs like hallucinogens, and the webs actually came out better than caffeine. And you're like, well, that really makes you question what exactly was going through, the spider's mind trying to put this thing together.
Yeah, and caffeine has the dependency, which is on a level which people are, again, not aware of. This is all what I've found over my time checking this all out and finding evidence, which I wanted to present to potential readers in my audience. And here is a statistic which shows you that caffeine is a psychoactive drug, which is in its level between alcohol and LSD. So here are all these psychoactive drugs and where they're standing relatively to each other. And for me, caffeine is a gateway to drugs, which we talk soon about how it is with children and with unborn babies, what's going on there.
Well, and that's the other thing is most people don't drink their coffee just as coffee, right? The form of caffeine that we take in, like it's typically accompanied by a lot of sugar. And
Yeah.
sugar is even more addictive, where you're like you'd have an easier time quitting cocaine than you do sugar, I think is the statistic.
Yes. And what it is, we shouldn't ignore one basic bottom line. Caffeine, coffee is a big business. And they built around coffee a coffee culture. It's no more just a cup of coffee. You have here to go, come along, some biscuits and some cake and some whatever and fancy stuff on the coffee, right? And you have all these different type of coffees. It's like an invention. They invented an entire marketing strategy to make it very attractive, give it all these different names and different ways to present it and different cups even, not only the coffee, but as well the cups and what I call the runaround around coffee. So coffee is a big attraction and a big moneymaker and a possible gateway to a life with drugs because your body starts to get used to drugs. Now, I looked into the situation, which is very, very, very devastating for me, is the consumption of caffeine by expecting mothers. Now, we know logically that intellectually that everything a mother consumes and digests mentally and physically is shared with the unborn baby in the womb. It doesn't work any other way. That's normal, right? Now, many mothers, expecting mothers, keep drinking coffee with caffeine. This is, you love your baby? Wow. Or they drink soda pops, even if they stop coffee. There are many drink soda pops or energy drinks because they need more energy with the baby. They need blah, 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 yeah, okay. So they share all this with the baby. Now, I found a study which I quote. Everything I'm saying here in my book is much more intense and with quotes, right, and sources. So in a university in Spain, they found out that there is a correlation between drinking coffee as an expecting mother and slower fetal growth and a significantly lower birth weight, and that the cartilage of a baby is still developing and doesn't develop and gets partly damaged through caffeine. Of course, later on, as a baby, caffeine passes through the mother milk to the baby, so the breast milk. And again, it's always doses of caffeine the baby grows up with. Now, you may have heard lately, and through the work of Mr. Kennedy, that the level of autism is on the rise dramatically. For me, that's my personal opinion. My personal opinion, there are three main reasons. One reason is a mental between mother, parents, and the baby of tension, let's call it this way. And then there is the reason of electromagnetic radiation, cell phones, Wi-Fi, and there's a reason of caffeine, right? As we heard in the study, caffeine reduces the gray brain matter. So how sensitive is that all in an unborn baby? And then the last not least for me is then for a baby, for unborn baby and born baby, a possible gateway to drugs later on. Because it worked as a drug, it acts like a drug. So for the young person to grow up, and one of the first drinks majorly young children drink, they have their French fries and their soda pops. So they're already on the street of addiction. And then to grab for the next addiction is just another step, right? These are my personal opinions, okay? But some of that are supported by this medical study, which I quote in my book.
Well, and that's what I found really fascinating. I mean, your book always has QR codes and stuff where you're like, I cited a study. Here is the code for the study. Like, feel free to look for yourself. But when we're talking about, like, reduced brain matter, the study had said, like, yes, they will recover as long as they stop using caffeine. But if we're, raising children in the environment that especially America raises children in, they're constantly just inundated with caffeine in soda. So does their brain ever really recover, or is it like permanently stunted?
Of course, it's permanently. Because let's not forget, the reality is the vast majority of people who are consuming caffeine products will voluntarily not stop. Even the doses might go higher, but they will not stop. Okay. So the percentage of people who realize what I'm saying and then say, okay, fine, I got to stop. You can forget this is whatever. I don't know. 1%, 0.1%. It's not significant. The majority of people, and when I talk to people or people get aware of my book, many people who should read it refuse to read it. They want to stay in their comfort zone. Don't shake my universe. Okay. And interesting enough, caffeine was listed for 20 years with the Olympic Committee on the doping list. When you were found with a certain amount of caffeine in your blood, in your urine, you were banned for 20 years. And then on a Monday morning in the year 2004, the Olympic Committee woke up and they said, oh, you know what? It is not a doping product anymore. My personal opinion again, that the industry, and especially the energy industry, energy drinks industry, must have gone after them and said, look, if you keep that on the doping list, we have no chance to sell our product. That's my interpretation. That's why they took it off the list.
I mean, when you see sporting events, they're all sponsored, and you can see, giant advertisements for Monster and Rockstar and Red Bull. And you're like, okay, well, if those people aren't giving you money for your sporting events, where is your money coming from?
Exactly. And when you look at advertising, talking about the topic advertising, to my observation, about 99% of all products which you consume run through your mouth are products of addiction. Coffee, alcohol, cigarettes, pharmaceutical products, sweets, sugar, fast food. All these products are addictive products. And these companies are not stupid. If they spend $10 million on advertising, they get it 100 times back because they know once a person is hooked with this product, we have a client for a lifetime. And this is how it works. And it's a money thing. It's not ethics, and it's not what we shouldn't do and should do. And it's not taught in school. And what's more important, it's not taught on medical school to doctors. Doctors in medical school are not educated in caffeine. They're not educated in electromagnetic radiation, the danger of cell phone and Wi-Fi. They're not even educated properly in nutrition and nutrition supplements and many other subjects. And sometimes when I give seminars, I have doctors in my seminars, not full with doctors, but doctors find their way to my seminars word of mouth. And what they say, which is kind of shocking, what you just explained, the seminars usually last 1 day or 2 days, right? Where I cover a lot of issues. And their reaction is, well, we don't understand. Everything you're saying makes sense, okay? It's just logic, it's sense. You don't need to be a rocket science. However, why didn't they teach us in the medical school? Okay. And they admit on face-to-face meetings, they admit that they were trained to prescribe pharmaceutical products. End of the line. That's all they do. So now there will be listeners out there and people who watch our show who say, well, I'm not addicted. Okay. Well, I raised the question, why don't you want to find out for yourself whether you have a caffeine addiction? There's no blame in my side, and I say in the book as well, but an understanding how addiction works. And to be aware of a problem is already 50% of the solution. And it's very simple. If you go and stop consuming any kind of caffeine product today, my experience from readers and people who got back to me is that 90, 95%, 98% at times cannot survive 2-3 days. Within 2-3 days latest, they get stronger withdrawal symptoms, which are not pleasant. There's no question. Yeah. Withdrawal symptoms, no matter what you withdraw from, are not pleasant, okay? Because you have used the body to consume certain things. And if you think about hard drugs, for example, or I work with alcoholics, right? You take away what you fed the body with, and the body is used to it, and you take it away, even if it's unhealthy, you get withdrawal symptoms, and they're not very nice. Interesting enough, I write my books, my material, and my lectures, everything in German. It's my mother language. My English is not that fantastic. It's okay, but cannot compare it with my class in German language. So I write my material in German first, and then I translate it myself, and then I give it to somebody to correct it. Got to be like this, okay? Sure. So the person who corrected my book, who I asked to correct my book, a professional lecturer, the first initial reaction was, oh, that's BS, nonsense. When she read the title, right? BS. Said, well, it's fine, I'll pay you for it. Just correct what is wrong in my English, right? And after 2 weeks of working and translating, she came back to me and says, look, as from today, I stopped drinking coffee. Because once she read through a certain part of the book and she worked through it, what I'm saying is not rocket science. It's basic information, and a lot is just common sense. And I must give you at the end now, before we finish, the reason caffeine is the problem, which may be very surprising. Yeah. So, and she said, okay, I stopped, okay? Thank you very much. It made sense. I stopped. A few weeks later, she said, sorry, I couldn't keep it up. I just couldn't keep it up, okay? All right. So my research went now into the medical world, but deep into the medical world. And I want people to be aware what happens. Why is caffeine a problem? We have what I call, by nature, by God-given emergency programs in our body. To throw up or diarrhea is an emergency program for the body to cleanse itself. It's an emergency program. The body does it. You want it or not, you have no power over it. Thirst is an emergency program. The body said, give me some water because otherwise I will die. The same for food. The same for sleep. I fell asleep as a young guy in the car while driving, and it scared the shit out of me. There's a point, and most people may have experienced it. You want to stay awake. You want to stay awake for whatever reason, not necessarily driving a car, which is a bad idea, but something else, right? You want to stay awake, or to see that show tonight, or that basketball match, whatever it is. You want to stay awake. And suddenly you're gone, and you didn't even realize it. There's a point, emergency program, where the body says, screw you, I need sleep. And I pull it in now, whether you like it or not. So we have emergency programs which are stronger than our free will to say no, okay? And now one of these emergency programs, which is maybe the strongest we have, or let's say in our society, the most dominant we have nowadays, is stress. Stress is an emergency program, and I explain why and what has it to do with caffeine. If 30,000 years ago you were confronting a saber-toothed tiger, you were scared to death. Everybody is. Or similar animals, or similar situation. And what do you do when you're scared to death in this situation? You have only two chances. You have to fight like hell, or you have to run like hell in order to survive, right? In both cases, it's a survival emergency program by nature in your body. Nature says, you don't need to have sex now. You don't need to think about, I'm hungry, which you were 5 minutes before. Nature says, what is needed to fight this thing or to run away? I have to give you a pumping lung. I have to give you higher blood pressure. I have to give you more energy to run or to fight. I do this. I'll beef you up. I'll bring you over the top. And meanwhile, I'll reduce or I completely stop all functions in the body which are not needed for this survival thing, right? This happens when you are scared to death. And what happens is, in your body, the adrenaline glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, These adrenaline glands produce adrenaline, and this adrenaline production goes over the top. An emergency situation, produce all the adrenaline it can possibly have to survive. And the body does that. And you cannot control it. You cannot stop it. It works automatically, like putting into sleep, like having number 1 or 2. You cannot control it. There's a point where number 1, number 2 is stronger than your free will to say no. Now, what does it have to do with caffeine? It has to do everything with caffeine. When I drink caffeine, caffeine mimics, so to speak, this fear of death. It makes the adrenaline glands pump adrenaline like crazy without your control. So the mechanics, whether you stand in front of a tiger who's attacking you or you drink after you drink a cup of coffee, is the same. You have an adrenaline level which is artificial high. And yes, it gives you more energy. We'll talk about this in a second. It gives you more energy. There's no question. It's no question, right? But what it does is, at the same time, certain body functions are reduced or stopped. You live in an artificial world, in an artificial created world. And don't forget, this is not old. This is pretty new in our development as human beings. Because coffee, as we know it today, was not able to be bought. People who were average people in income or poor people were not able to buy coffee until 100 years ago. It was too expensive. Okay. It was just for privileged people, which I explain in my book and so on and so forth. So these are the mechanics why caffeine creates this problem. And in my book, I explain, we all heard the expression fight or flight mode, right? It comes exactly from this. And it's our sympathetic nerve system, which kicks in and takes over control, which is very unhealthy, versus the parasympathetic nerve system, in which we are cool and relaxed, right?
And a lot of people don't understand quite how caffeine works, right? They're like, it seems to defy the laws of physics, right? Because you're like, it just gives you energy. And you're like, well, that's not really how it works. Like inside your body, there is adenosine, which helps your heart stay in rhythm and healthy and rested. And caffeine uses the exact same receptors as adenosine. So instead of resting and regulating your heartbeat, it just lets it go wild. And you're like, yeah, that increases your blood. That's, moving you around, but with like a very bad effect because your heart can't regulate until that caffeine's out of your system. And I think that the half-life of caffeine is like 6 hours. So you're like, okay, well, within 6 hours, like you still aren't recovering.
My research is that caffeine, a cup of coffee stays in your system for 20 hours. Now, we don't need to discuss it's 20 hours or 18 hours or 16 and a half hours. It's many, 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 many hours. And I give a seminar, if you're interested in, which is called The 19 Possible Causes for Bad Sleep. And one of the 19 possible causes for bad sleep is caffeine. Okay. So it takes so much time to get out of his system, but the typical caffeine consumer, when he starts with a coffee in the morning at 8 o'clock, right? That's not usually his only coffee of the day. The majority drink 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon, the evening, okay? And then it takes the time to get out of your system. Here I have an example of hidden caffeine. And that's, as they say, a true story. My wife came home with this packaging here. And you see fruits, yes?
Yeah.
You see all these beautiful information. And they talk about vitamin this, vitamin that, and gives you energy and so on and so forth. And I said to my wife, hold on a second. That doesn't work. And if you have just fruits, you don't get that energy push they're advertising on the packaging. It doesn't. Yeah. So I looked into it and see there on the backside, it has caffeine. Would you ever go back? Would you ever imagine that this packaging, this product, it's a drink, you mix it in water and whatever, that this would have caffeine?
Yeah, you're like, here's a raspberry, a blueberry, and a blackberry. And by the way, it's caffeinated.
Give me the packaging, let me make some photos.
I know that end was a bit abrupt, as I had warned, but in just looking up caffeine products, I can find them in Drinks, beans, nuts, teas, snack bars, powders, pills, pouches, gummies, candies, and so many more still. Is this why we're all so burnt out all the time? Do we all just owe a colossal sleep debt? And for what if we aren't doing it for our own sake? In ranking news, the global ranks are now as follows. Prepare yourself. Number 1, Ireland. Number 2, New Zealand. Is everybody seeing this? You hearing this? Number 3, the United States, with California, Wisconsin, and Virginia out front. Number 4, Australia, with Queensland dominating. And number 5, Scotland of the United Kingdom, just leading Ghana. What an odd month this has started out as, and I love it. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty pleased to all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.